have a little more history than award-winning author and artist of the gallery, but I've known Jeff since 11th grade in art class is when we met.
1968.
Oh, never mind that. No dates.
Do the math.
Yeah, but it was in art class that we met, which is why I have followed his artistic interests throughout his life, and also his career. And I'm his baby mama. We had a long and very wonderful marriage. Until it wasn't. No, it's always wonderful. We're still the best of friends,
Yes.
So, when you look around at your art, and one of the things you say commonly about it is that you're always concerned and interested in the people. It's very, very strongly character-driven. Everything that you do has people in it. And then you also include suggestions, both in the background and sometimes more literally in the imagery behind the characters, what their story is. So I know you're very concerned about people's character stories and the stories behind the people that you draw. But I also think that in order to understand the art better, we need to understand the artist. So I was going to ask him some more personal questions about your background and what brought you to do the art that you do. So we'll start with a little bit about how and where you grew up. If you could tell us some of that.
Well, I was born in Minnesota to a family that very quickly moved on and lived overseas most of my life as a young person. And my parents lived most of their adulthood overseas. My father was with the Foreign Service, and when I was 5, we moved to Korea for a couple of years, and then we lived in Thailand for 10, and then I came back for high school with Jeannie. But during that process, I saw the world, and I saw my normal was very different from most people's normal, my contemporaries. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the work. The years that I was in Thailand were most of the Vietnam War era, so we saw a lot of that in Bangkok. A lot of the soldiers coming, on breaks and for R&R from the trauma of that. And I saw a lot of the worldwide diaspora, people moving all over, searching for a place to live, and that's reflected in a lot of my work.
Mm-hmm. So how is it that you're, in your career, it has always been very social justice focused from, you were a social worker to start with, and then, like your parents were very involved in service as well, and not in like the State Department, but in education. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how that might have influenced your own concern about social justice?
Oh, completely. I started out as a social worker, and then I became a lawyer for a long stint, and then most recently I was a case manager in a clinic that supports people who are homeless. And that focus on the person and the person's story and the narrative and the backstory is always vital to me. And it shows up in my work, and it's a central theme for everything I do, because that's where the story is for me.
Right. And how did your parents' work influence that point of view, do you think?
My parents were always very community-oriented. My father was definitely a person of service, and it was very important for him to imbue that in us, my brothers and I.
So you've said that you're self-taught, and I wanted to go a little bit about the history of your art experience, because it's true. I mean, we had class together in high school. Mm-hmm. We used to go to do life drawing in Southwest. We'd skip school and go to galleries. So I want to know how your truancy fed into No, but in terms of what drew you to continue drawing and being self-taught?
Well, I do remember my first year, my first experience that I remember being creative was sitting on the floor with my mother. She was drawing, and we would sit there and we would create and cut and paste and draw things. She used to draw cutout figures with pointy little hands and pointy little toes. I remember that vividly. But that was always imbued, that connection with me, I'm sure was connected with connection with her, you know, continued with me as the creative impetus. But then all the way through school, I was always involved with something. And I tried a lot of different things along the way, you know, pottery and painting and printmaking, but I was always drawing was the thing that brought me back.
And what is it about the tactile experience of drawing that keeps you with it and you know, helps you develop the themes that you work on?
Well, there's a sense of primacy about drawing. I mean, it's immediate, it's right there. You don't have to go through any prep, you go straight into it. But there's something about the line that I'm completely obsessed with. I used to think that it was because the line of a pencil was like narrative, was like writing, but it's really not that. It's much more expressive than that. There's an expressiveness, there's a descriptiveness to the line, and I'm crazy about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember in our very early drawing classes with our teacher, Mrs. Fite, who has found us on Facebook. It's been
Shout
great.
out to Mrs. Fite.
Shout out to Mrs. Fite. You know, I would look at your drawings, and she always complimented him, but not mine. Mine, but his were always primary. But I do remember that the line was always very strong with you.
Always, yeah.
Always. And then even seeing how you've developed over the years since you retired and became a full-time artist, even though the work is filled in, it's still, look at this water and look at those shirts. Look at their expressions. It's still very, very line influenced.
Yeah, but these days that's true. These days it's more about layering of lines and then erasing. Layering of lines and then erasing. So a lot of this is erasure. The line comes through an eraser.
Wow.
Which creates the layer and the depth.
Right. I remember that from your earlier work as well, that the erasing which is such an interesting process. How to create, you know, by eliminating, right?
Yeah, which is why when I have pieces in a gallery like this where the lighting is so spectacular, it's a surprise because I've layered and layered and erased, and in my studio where the light is not that great, but when I see it here, I say, whoa.
Yeah,
wow.
It's like, what happened?
The erasure really creates a depth, especially with skin tones.
Yes, it does, a depth with the skin tones, with the background, with the texture overall, so it's really remarkable. So you have many themes in your work. In this particular show, Bearing Witness, you mentioned at the end of your little description of it, what prompts their hope, their faith in crossing. And so I wanted to ask you, what prompts your continuing to work? What prompts your inspiration, your faith in continuing to create, not knowing what the outcome is going to be?
Yes, it's true. I don't always know what the outcome is going to be. Sometimes I have an idea of it, but then midway or partially way through it takes a whole different route. But for me, it is all about the character exploration. And it's usually a character exploration within an external event. And in this particular collection, it's crisis. It's all about people hitting a border, hitting a boundary, trying to cross it, being stymied, but going forward anyway because they have the drive, the motivation of the faith, which is a huge thing. Which is why I've called this the crossing. I mean, there's a faith connotation to crossing, a spiritual connotation to crossing, but it's also an event.
Right.
People crossing the Rio Grande to find sanctuary. I mean, a couple of years ago, I did a series of drawings about people looking for a home, looking for sanctuary, which is very important to me because I worked in a clinic for a long time that supported people who are homeless, and so I was confronted with that every day. And so I did a series on American homelessness, which I really worked with. And then I did a series on the diaspora. I had a big series on the diaspora. People all over the world looking for a home, looking for a sanctuary. And it's the truth, it's the event today. People are searching. They're displaced and they're searching. They're displaced by events and they're searching for a home. And so that's been a huge motivation for me. And this particular collection hits on that, grows from that, but also it's imbued in current events.
Yes.
For example, this series here, I mean, it's inspired by the horror that people are going through right now of being woken up in the middle of the night by ice. You know, what are they seeing when they open the door? That's what this is about. But my work is also, I see it, I like to have it seen both as an internal psychological, emotional event and an external event. Hopefully both. Some people see one or the other. But this series could be one or the other or both.
Right.
And the same with this. This series, I originally had planned it to be an exploration of what happens when people hit the Trump wall. But it really turned into something much more emotional and much more psychological about people being separated and being reunited. And of course, you can see the influence of film noir. I'm obsessed with the movies of the 40s and the early 50s, and you can kind of see that in the background too. But it's not only just this exploration of what happens to people at the border, the shock of it, the confusion about where are we going next, what's going to happen next, but it's also kind of that internal exploration as well.
One of the most remarkable things about this series of 3 is how there's one character in each drawing that it just completely draws you in. It's just looking right at you. And I think that's one of the things
that's kind of characteristic of my work, because I like to have a protagonist.
There's always someone
story.
who's going to be the person that you're going, oh, wow, what is his story? Yeah, so you've always been a storyteller. And it's interesting to hear you say that about, especially about, you know, belonging and home, because you started out as a social worker, which is with people with disabilities who were, you know, how are they a part of our culture? So that was always a question, and one of the themes that you continue to explore, even though it's not exactly people with disabilities. And then your next job was with housing, in public housing. And then your next job, you wanted to make some money, so you became a JD and became a lawyer. But it was with a housing agency. So you've always been involved in that. And how is this work advancing that interest of yours?
Oh, that's a good question. It does. I do move with the narrative. It seems to go deeper and deeper. But are you asking about how it influences other people to see it, or just me? Well, I do feel like I explore deeper and deeper each time. My work used to be very detail-oriented, and these days it's very expressive. These days I have come to embrace the fast, expressive work, and I think that shows in some of this, not all of it, because some of this is more detail. But so I'll sit and I'll draw fast, and then I'll sit for a long time and look at it, and then I'll erase and draw fast again, because I like the depth of exploration that comes with the fast line.
Right, it's like what comes out is a surprise.
Oh, it's often a surprise. Yeah, it's often a surprise.
Which is,
and I like the composition that's askew. I don't like easy centered composition, though. I want something that's a little off-putting, a little upsetting to people, the viewer.
Yeah, like, whoa, right? I know, I find those figures in the background so powerful in relationship to the main character, but even the little sketchy ones in the very far background, which is an emphasis again on your line and then the erasure that's happening among the other characters. It's just a stunning work. It's one of my favorites. I'll buy that from you.
And then there's this series here, the very small drawings. And this is a series I did about, again, about what's happening with people facing deportation. But it's interesting that you had a comment about it. that the squares of light in each picture were reminiscent of what your mother went through when she was in prison. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, my mother was in prison during the Japanese occupation of Korea, and so she was in prison for 90 days because her husband was in the U.S. going to school, but they thought he was a spy, and this was right after Pearl Harbor, so they put her in prison. And one of the things that she talked about was how she focused on that one little window of light that she had. It was freezing, it was in the winter, but that was one of the things that gave her salvation. So when I saw that, I thought of that. You thief! I guess the last question I have before I open it up to see if who else has questions is like, what is it about art that draws you back to the page every time? Besides the themes that you explore, what is it about the creative process that excites you and makes you stay in your studio for hours and hours? And
oh wow, that's a good question. There is a drive to create. There isn't a drive, but there's also a drive to express what I'm going through and project my views into another picture that other people will experience and get something from. I mean, I never know what people are going to see. Everybody sees something different, and I love that.
yeah,
I love that. Jeannie and I did a workshop recently. She's a writer, and I'm a drawer. And there's a form of writing called ekphrasis, which is writing that's based on a piece of art. And we did an exhibit out at the Writer Center, and she wrote pieces about several of the works, which were just amazing. And then she had a workshop with students who also picked a piece that they wrote about. And what I love about that is everybody's different.
yeah.
Everybody's different. I don't impose my views on anybody when they're viewing the work. I just love to see what other people do, and that inspires me.
Right. I think that is both the wonder and beauty of creativity. It's so individual, it's so unique, and it gives back so much. So thank you for giving us what you've given us.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.